webinar. My name is Mike Kramer. I'll be presenting. I am the Calibration Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. And as you are been alerted to, and as you can see from the initial screen, today's topic will be ISO IEC 17025, 2005, reporting the results, ensuring compliance with 17025. This is section 510 primarily within the standard. And to me, this is the finished product, the end result. So 17025 is, of course, related to calibration and testing lab compliance with that quality management system. When all is said and done, what your customers are finally receiving and what you're producing is what's specified in section 510, reporting the results. Wanted to alert you all that once again this webinar is being recorded and will be available in its entirely on the PJLA website, which is right there. We have a link that says recorded webinars. This particular webinar is set for 1 hour. I don't foresee going that long, but we do save some time at the end for questions. So those of you that have logged on before know the protocol for that. You should have a section on your, you should have a part available on your screen there for asking questions and submitting them to us. And we'll go over that again at the end. Again, all of our webinars over the last several years are actually available on our website. So once again, reporting the results. Calibration or test report whom utilizes a symbol or references their accreditation status on calibration or test reports are considered accredited certificates or reports and come under the realm of section 510 of 17025 and any applicable policies of the accreditation body. So PJLA, I reference SOP3, and that is our accreditation symbol procedure. So this actually references on top of 17025 requirements when you utilize our symbol on your calibration and test reports. That's an example up there is depicted on a screen of a calibration of how that needs to be depicted. Also, if you reference accreditation, and we've expanded and revised that, it's been a few months now that the wording, it has to be very specific as to the accreditation body, the accreditation number. The sample you have up there, if that was on a report, we would still consider that an accredited type report because you're referencing it. However, we might take corrective action as far as how that needs to be referenced. Or excuse me, have the lab take corrective action. So again, if there's any questions regarding Perry Johnson's usage of symbol and accreditation language specified on the report on our website under resources, SOP3 would be your go-to document there. We're going to delve right into 510 and the requirements. 510.1 is a general requirement. This is section 510 where it breaks down. You have references to testing, you have references to calibration, you have some sections that are applicable to both. Testing and calibration, there's also sampling referenced in this section. So 510.1 is general. This is for both testing and calibration. Pretty straightforward. The results of each test, calibration, or series of tests or calibrations carried out by the laboratory shall be reported accurately, clearly, ambiguously, and objectively, and in accordance with any specific instructions in the test or calibration methods. Ambiguously, that's going to come up a few times, and we define that later on. But that's you should not be confusing any statement with anything else. It's the short definition of that. Continuing with the general requirements, the results shall be reported usually in a test report or calibration certificate, and shall include all the information requested by the customer and necessary for the interpretation of the test or calibration result, and all information required by the method used. This information is normally that required within 5.10.2 and 5.10.3 or 5.10.4, depending if you're a calibration or testing laboratory. A couple notes. Notes in the standard is recommendations or just information that's being passed on. So note 1 specifies test reports and calibration certificates are sometimes called test reports and calibration reports respectively. That's how they're referenced in the standards. It could be calibration certs, could be testing certs, certificates of analysis. You may have other terminology that you use within your industry. In the realm of 17025 in this standard, that's what they're referred to. And Note 2 specifies that both test and calibration reports and certificates may be issued as hard copies or by electronic transfer, provided that this requirement of this international standard are met. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later here as far as the electronic data transfer and some things that need to be taken into consideration when that is done. General still on for both. In the case of test or calibration performed for internal customers, or in the case of a written agreement with the customer, the results may be reported in a simplified way. Any information listed in 5.10.2 through 5.10.4 which is not reported to the customer shall be readily available in the laboratory which carries out the test or calibration. So what this is stating here is that 17025, it does allow for simplified reporting. That is, some of these elements could be removed from the calibration certificates. In the case, we'll talk about internal customers first. What are internal customers? Internal customers are those in which the lab is performing testing or calibration for the internal organization in which the laboratory is part of. The lab can report only the desired information, but needs to have on file all records, all required information to account for all applicable sections of 510 and that of the accreditation body. So in other words, the lab is a lab within another organization. You may be a manufacturer and you may be actually producing equipment that you're going to have calibrated internally there, or you may be utilizing equipment within your facility that you use in the manufacturer. You may have an internal calibration lab. The lab can report in a simplified manner. Bear in mind the simplified reporting alleviates the lab from having to report the information on the report or certificate. However, it does not alleviate the lab from having that information available. I'm going to talk about simplified reporting for external customers. These are, if you're a testing or calibration lab, these are your customers from the outside sending you samples, artifacts to test. When can simplified reporting be done in those cases? Any simplified reporting for external customers must be agreed to, and that agreement should be available in writing and available as a record. Each external customer having simplified reporting must have its own agreement. Again, all information within Section 510 should be available. So a couple things there. With external customers, it has to be agreed to. That agreement has to be produced as a record and should be available and needs to be in writing. And All the information, even though it may not be provided on the report, should be available. Going to resort to a section in records here, 413.2.1. We did a webinar on records not that long ago. We went over technical and quality records. And 413.2.1 for records specifies that records for each calibration shall contain sufficient information to facilitate, if possible, identification and factors affecting the uncertainty and to enable the test or calibration to be repeated under conditions as close as possible to the original. Therefore, even though that you're doing simplified reporting, you may be doing it for an external customer, you may have it in writing, and it does have that written agreement in place. All the information needed in 510 and all the information needed to repeat the test or calibration does need to be available. Continuing with common elements for test and or calibration reports and certificates. Each test or report or calibration certificate shall, and probably mention it at every webinar I do, a shall is a must, so that is a requirement. Shall include at least the following information unless the lab has a valid reason for not doing so. First thing on the list there is a title, test report, calibration cert, basically identifying what this is, calibration, report of calibration, certificate of analysis, whatever, it needs to have a title. Secondly, the name and address of the laboratory and the location of the test and or calibration, and where the test and or calibration were carried out if different from the address of the laboratory. So a couple things there. You need to, you're the laboratory performing a calibration. If it's done at your fixed location, you need to have the, of course, your address there, regardless of if it's done at the fixed or at the customer site. So that's what I'm getting to here at the next part of section B here. If different from the address of the laboratory. So these could be considered calibrations that are done at the customer site. If you look on our scopes of accreditation or even your own scope, you might have a subscript F, which means you're accredited to do it at the fixed facility. You may have a subscript O, which specifies you can do the calibration or test at the customer facility. So if the test or calibration is being done at someplace else other than the fixed facility, that needs to be identified on the report or certificate. Continuing with common elements, you have to have a unique identification of the test or calibration certificate. It does reference such as a serial number on each page and identification in order to ensure that the page is recognized as part of the test report or calibration certificate, and a clear indication at the end of the test report or calibration certificate. Unique identification, it specifies serial numbers. Quite often I will see a unique test number or a certificate number. This unique number should always be able to identify the specific unique report or certificate from all others the laboratories performed over time. It's got to be a non-repeating number. So it specifies a serial number. I sometimes will see that with calibration labs. Make, model, serial number, that in conjunction with the test, they could be considered as a unique identifier. Continuing with common elements, the name and address of the customer. So that's a person you're performing, your client, their name, but also their address, unless you have a valid reason for not needing to include that. And this is assuming that simplified reporting is not in place. E, identification of the method used. This is a procedure that you carry out the test or calibration. Can be an internal lab procedure, just such as an internal SOP or work instructions, or it could be a standard procedure such as those that are recognized and organizations such as the ASTM, ASME, or USP type method. The procedure needs to be specified on those test and calibration accredited reports. A description of the condition of an ambiguous identification of the items tested or calibrated. Again, that word ambiguous pops up, and that's why I can present this. Basically, it means there's something that cannot be mistaken to be something else. It needs to be clearly stated exactly what it is that you're testing or calibrating. Clear example of this could be the make, model, and serial number. You have to have the condition. In calibration laboratories, you often get that in the as-found values that you report to customers. G, the receipt of the test or calibration items, where this is critical to the validity and application of the results and the dates of the performance of the test or calibrations. So again, this is where it's critical to the validity. So that will come into play where perhaps shelf life may be critical if a sample may degrade over a period. Something that comes to mind that I was once involved in was moisture content. Therefore, it would be important to record the date of receipt if you are determining moisture content, which would tend to lose validity over time. You may be required, once a sample is received, that it has to be tested within so many hours of receipt. Calibration, there may be long equilibration times that may need to be specified before a calibration is undertaken. In that case, it may be necessary to report the actual receipt date. Reference to the sampling plan and procedures used by the laboratories or other bodies where these are relevant to the validity or application of the results. Sampling, we're going to look at that a little bit further, but sampling is common in testing. However, it's very rare in calibration. I've never actually seen it used in calibration. Calibration, you're calibrating everything that's sent in. You're not basing your results on a calibration of, let's say, a few micrometers, and based on that sample, assuming that all the others are within tolerance. Testing, it's quite done on a daily basis where samples are taken. They're brought into the lab. The lab then may prepare a subsample from the sample that was submitted. It's supposed to be a replica of a entire population or lot. Continuing with common elements, the test or calibration results were appropriate to unit measurements, where I would say that's probably always the case. It is appropriate to specify what unit your results are in. Liters, inches, pounds, kilograms needs to be specified. J, the names, functions, and signatures or equivalent identifications of persons authorized in the test report or calibration certificate. So a couple things here. These are the person that's actually approving the report, releasing the report. Could be the actual person performing the test or calibration. If so, the name of that individual along with their title needs to be identified on the calibration certificate. Hence, if we just see a name without a title, that's not meeting a function. That's not meeting the requirements of the standard. Sometimes it goes through another level of approval. It could be a quality manager that's actually reviewing certificates and releasing them to the client. It specifies equivalent identification. What is that? That is anything that can be used to trace to the exact individual taking responsibility for that report. Hence, electronic signature, mark, or company-assigned employee numbers may also be acceptable, as long as you can trace it back to the individual that is actually releasing the report, authorizing the test or calibration report. Where relevant, a statement to the effect that the results relate only to the items tested or calibrated. Again, I referenced relevant. An example might be where it's not relevant if you're testing or calibrating a coordinate measuring machine with a serial number, basically one item on one report. It may come into play if you're calibrating, say, a dozen half-inch micrometers, all the same make, model. It would be relevant to state which results are for which micrometer. Couple recommendations here. These are notes right out of 17025 at the conclusion of 510.2 Common Elements. Hard copies of test and calibration certificates should also include the page number and total number of pages. Previously we specified you have to indicate the end of the report. It's recommended that you include the page number and the total number of pages. And it is also recommended that laboratories include a statement specifying that the test report or calibration certificate shall not be reproduced except in full without written approval of the laboratories. So that's a recommendation. These are things like if you provided a report to a customer, they want to cut and paste excerpts of that report, perhaps utilize it on their website or utilize it on another report that they're going to produce that states that they can only do so without written approval of the laboratory, with written approval of the laboratory. Okay, so that concludes the elements of 510.2 common elements. You get into test reports under 510.3. So this specifically states in the test reports, in the standard testing. So these are common elements for testing reports. 510.3.1. In addition to the requirements listed in 510.2, test reports shall, where necessary for the interpretation of the test results, include the following information. A, deviation from, additions to, exclusions from the test methods, and information on specific test equipment, test conditions, such as calibration conditions. Deviation, what does that mean? A deviation or exclusion? Customers may ask for a test to be performed outside of those elements prescribed in the test method. If so, that needs to be documented, or deviating from your laboratory procedures. This would be, for example, when it's talking about the environmental conditions. We're referring to testing activities here. Testing may be specific, that the specific test will be performed under specific environmental conditions, say with the absence of vibration or within temperature range. This would be those things which may cause a variation in the results if not present. So if you were operating outside of those prescribed ranges, that would need to be listed. Again, testing laboratories, and where relevant, a statement of compliance or non-compliance with the requirements or a specification. So this is where you are making a statement of compliance. You're checking, you're testing a sample, and this could be as simple as a pass-fail statement. If you're testing, if you're specifying something is within a certain spec or within a certain tolerance, that would be relevant. Where applicable, a statement on the estimated uncertainty of measurement information on uncertainty is needed in test report when it is, again, relevant to the validity or application of the test results, when a customer instructs so requires, or when uncertainty affects compliance to a specification limits. I referenced 5462. This is the actual section of the standard on test methods, and 5462 actually addresses uncertainty and testing uncertainty and when it needs to be determined. We're talking about reporting these on actual test reports here in section 510. So testing, it's a wide array of testing that is out there. Example that I came up with here is an example in tolerances in dimensional inspection, which is considered a test, may be relevant to know what the impact of uncertainty is. So in that case, it may be relevant to report the uncertainty on the specific testing report. Where appropriate and needed, opinions and interpretation. Again, only where appropriate, and that's the way it's stated in the standards. Only where appropriate, perhaps to clarify the nature of the test or information which may be beneficial to the end user, should be included as an opinion or an interpretation. E, additional information which may be required by specific methods, customers, or group of customers. And again, this could be pertaining, again, to the end user application of the artifact calibrated or sample tested. Okay, so we're now into another subsection, and this is 510.3.2, and this is in regards to test reports, and those test reports containing the results of sampling. So again, it's very rare that you would see this in calibration at all. 510.3.2 is in regards to test reports and sampling. So in addition to the requirements listed in what we just went over, 510.2 and 510.3.1, test reports containing the results of sampling shall include the following where necessary for the interpretation of test results. A, the date of sampling. B, the ambiguous identification of substance, materials, or products sampled, including the name and manufacturer, the model or type of designation, and serial number as appropriate. What I sort of depicted there at the bottom, I was involved in the seed testing at one time, and really put things in perspective as far as what a sample was. Had inspectors would go into a warehouse, there was a set procedure where they would take samples of seeds. So that's what's depicted down there. Probing a bag, collecting a random sample. From that sample, the inspector would bring that sample back to the lab, where the laboratory had its own procedure for creating a subsample of that sample that was taken out in the field. When all was said and done, you would have maybe a sample that may perhaps be in the area of 50 grams. That's supposed to represent a replica sample of that entire lot of seeds that the original inspector went out and took from the warehouse. Again, the location of sampling. This could include any diagram, sketches, or photographs. So this can be geographically or population of parts for manufacturing. You should be able to reproduce the sample and if needed. So geographically, let's say you were taking a water sample someplace, you should be able to specify where that sample was taken from. Population of parts in manufacturing. If you're producing parts, you may need to have a run number, a lot number, something to identify where that population came from. D, a reference to the sampling plan or procedure used. So if there was a specific method or specifications that the sampling was based on, that needs to be specified on the on the testing report that's employing sampling. I want to make one thing clear. With sampling, if your customer, your client are submitting the samples, they are actually taking the samples. You're testing them. It's not applicable to you. You are testing what the customer sent. So unless you're taking a subsample of that sample, that would be not applicable. If you're actually going out like I depicted in the example with the seed testing and then bringing it back and then making a sample out of that, then this section is applicable. E, details of any environmental conditions during sampling that may affect the interpretation of test results. So a couple of examples that perhaps there was temperature variation, humidity or rain, wind, something that was present when the sampling that was taking place that may actually affect the validity of the test needs to be recorded. 510.3.2 F, any standard or other specification for the sampling method or procedure and deviations, additions to, or exclusions from the specification concerned. Hence, here, going back to the example on seed, we have a specific procedure here specified for seed sampling. If you are to deviate from this, again, or exclude any part of this procedure, that needs to be specified on the test report. Okay, we now shift gears here. We did testing. Section 510 looked at testing and sampling. Now we're in 510.4, which is specific to calibration certificates. So in addition to the requirements listed in 510.2, which are common requirements, calibration certificates shall include the following where necessary for the interpretation of calibration results. A, the environmentals, so that's under which conditions the calibrations were made to have an influence on the results. I.e. typically things, and I got depicted there a device where you're capturing temperature, relative humidity, and barometric pressure. If you were doing a calibration that you had to take air buoyancy into effect, all of those would be needed because all those are captured and calculated into the air buoyancy equation. Okay, here's a big one here, 510.4.1. The uncertainty measurement and or a statement of compliance with identified metrological specification or clauses thereof. So here's where a little bit of the confusion comes into play. It states the uncertainty and or a statement of compliance. So it's some leeway there. But as you'll see here, it really depends on what you're using, who your customer is, as far as to what you need to report on these certificates. So as part of the contract review, the laboratory should consult customers, and this should be apparent in the contract review process. PL3, which is PJLA's policy on measurement uncertainties, we require if uncertainty is not to be reported, the customer must agree to this in writing. So our assessors will be looking for objective evidence of this. And the certificate should state they are available upon request. So why do we specify that requirement in our own PJLA policy. Reason being is ILAC, International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. They have policy guides. The one that correlates to our PL3 is ILAC P14, Policy for Uncertainty and Calibration. And it states the following. By exception, and where it has been established during contract review that only a statement of compliance with a specification is required, then the measured quantity value and the measurement uncertainty may be omitted on the calibration. The following shall, however, apply. So right here it's stating that it needs to be reviewed during the during the contract review process. Again, we'll be looking for objective evidence. We PJLA when we're doing assessments. However, when these following conditions apply, calibration uncertainty needs to be reported. So the calibration certificate is not intended to be used in support of further decimentation or metrology traceability, i.e. to calibrate another device. Hence, what this is saying here, if a calibration lab is calibrating, let's say, a thermometer, and that thermometer is not going to calibrate anything else, then this applies. If that thermometer, let's say, is going to be used, let's say you're a calibration lab and you send your thermometer in to another calibration lab, maybe to the manufacturer that has relatively small uncertainties that would benefit you, but you're going to use that thermometer to calibrate other thermometers. In that case, the uncertainty has to be reported. Hence, during the contract review process, it needs to be determined that whether or not these devices are going to be used to calibrate other devices. So hope that's clear there. So if it is, then reporting a statement of compliance on an accredited report will not be acceptable. Going on, as specified in 17025, clause 51042, which is test methods, calibration methods, the laboratory shall determine the uncertainty and take the uncertainty into account when issuing the statement of compliance. I'm sorry, 51042 is still reporting the results, but that is when you make a statement of compliance, you have to take uncertainty into account. So when you're making a statement of compliance within a specification, you're saying something passes and fails, you still need to know what the uncertainty is in order to make those statements. Therefore, you may not be reporting the uncertainty, but you still need to know what it is and take that into account when you're making a statement of compliance. Again, the laboratory, this is coming from directly from P14 ILAC document. The laboratory shall retain documentary evidence of the measured quantity, value, and the uncertainty of the measurement as specified in 7025, 51042, and 413, and shall provide such evidence upon request. Therefore, as stated that in PL3, we require that statement actually to be put on the certificate if the uncertainty is not being reported, that they are available upon request. So laboratory should maintain all the necessary records which would back up the stated uncertainty, i.e. things like, let's say, temperature. Temperature was a component of uncertainty. Should be available the uncertainty associated with that contributor. So again, with ILAC P14, that's sort of corresponds to our Harry Johnson PL3. Main thing out of reporting uncertainties is, of course, if the device is going to be used to calibrate something else, it needs to be reported. You need to establish this during the contract review process. You need to establish the fact that the customer does not want it. They have to agree to it. An agreement has to be somewhere within writing. And the certificate needs to state, and the laboratory needs to produce the uncertainty when requested. Now, when you're actually reporting measurement uncertainty, the results shall be normally included, the measured quantity, value, and the associated expanded uncertainty. So the uncertainty is the expanded uncertainty, and you must include the coverage factor, and the coverage probability shall be stated on the calibration certificate. In most all instances, you typically will see the uncertainty calculated, the expanded uncertainty at a coverage factor of K equals 2, which is a 95% confidence interval. All right, switching gears from uncertainty, still on calibration certificates. Evidence that the measurements are traceable. So that could be provided into one or two ways, or it could be provided in both ways within the certificate. One evidence of traceability is the actual logo of the accrediting body, provided they are part of the ILAC MRA, Mutual Recognition Agreement, which, of course, PJLA we are. So hence, if we see a calibration logo that's specified within the realms of the requirements in SOP 3, and the example I have in here, say this was on a calibration certificate. This is stating that this is under their accreditation, hence the calibration is traceable. The assessor should also verify, just because that's a logo on there, that the company, the organization that did the calibration could be accredited, but they may have to verify that they are in fact accredited to do the specific calibration. Or you can also make a statement, and this statement comes right out of our PL number 2, which is PJLA's policy on traceability. And that statement is presented to be used as an example. The calibration results published in the certificates were obtained using equipment capable of producing results that are traceable through NIST to the international system of units. So when you reference traceability on a certificate, calibration certificate, it needs to be referenced to the international units of measurements. We may see somebody referencing traceability to NIST. That is incorrect. It has to be referenced. Go to reference NIST. It needs to be through NIST to the international system of units. So like I said, if you did not use a logo, if you had that particular statement on there, that would be sufficient evidence of traceability. Again, you could use both. There's a note there that I referenced at the bottom of this slide, which basically backs up what I said about the accreditation logo of the accreditation body being on the certificate, which shows that is sufficient evidence of traceability. Continuing 5.10.4.2, the calibration certificate shall relate only to the quantities and results of the functional test. If a statement of compliance with a specification is made, this shall identify which clauses of specifications are met or not met, i.e. you may have a tolerance. What are those tolerances? Are they an NIST Handbook 44 tolerance, ISO 6999 tolerances? You can specify, what is being specified in making the statement of compliance, what specification is made or not made. When a statement of compliance with the specification is made, Omitting the results and the associated uncertainty, the laboratory shall record these results and maintain them for possible future references. Again, we already specified that you have to have those records available and should be able to recalculate the uncertainty and have all the records that are needed to do that. Again, when statements of compliance are made, the uncertainty of the measurements shall be taken into account. So this is saying when you say something passes or fails, that on a certificate, in tolerance, out of tolerance, that it is clearly within there. You have some of those instances where you have a gray area. You're saying something passes and fails. However, uncertainty may actually push it over the limit. So in that case, you may be reporting a pass condition, or if you add the uncertainty into it, it may actually push it over to the fail condition. So before you make a statement of compliance, the uncertainty needs to be taken into account. The laboratory needs to determine how that's going to be taken into account. It needs to be specified into the procedure. So their procedure for uncertainty. If they do not take it into account within their procedure, we require them to do it. We're not saying the lab has to do it this way, but they would default to the requirement that we state in PL3. And in a nutshell, PL3 specifies in those instances where the uncertainty may actually produce, and as found, say failure, that is called pass indeterminate. If it's the other way around, you're making a fail statement, but uncertainty may actually make it pass. PL3 coins the phrase fail indeterminate. I thought I had that listed on this slide here, those two terms. So again, you may not be reporting uncertainty on the certificate. Still need to know what it is, and you still need to take it into account, of course, when you're saying something passes and fails, and I need to specify how that was taken into account. When an instrument for calibration has been adjusted or repaired, the calibration results before and after adjustment or repaired, if available, shall be reported. So hence, calibration lab would be doing a calibration. You'll typically see things that says as found. I like to call it as used because when the artifact equipment comes into the lab, that's actually how their customer was using it. Hence, you may have a tolerance on there. Customer needs to know, how if it was actually within tolerance when they were using it, because if it was not, then of course, if they fall under the realm of accreditation, they have to follow their non-conforming testing or calibration procedure. Hence, the as found is as it comes in, and then perhaps the equipment was adjusted afterwards. That is as left. So here what I have, I tried to depict here is a pipette. Typically a pipette, if you're getting an accredited report, would come in, it would be taken to the laboratory, it would be tested in the conditions that it was received. So that's why I like to refer to them as used. Then if it failed or if it's going to be serviced, it would be taken, any adjustment, let's say the rings, seals, O-rings need to be replaced, needed to be relubed, and was adjusted to fall within tolerance. They would be the after adjustments values. Okay, continuing with calibration certificates and calibration labels. Shall not contain any recommendation on the calibration interval except where this has been agreed with the customer. This requirement may be superseded by legal regulations. So this is when you say calibration, if you're a calibration lab, and that if you're specifying a due date, an expiration date, that needs to come from your customer. So that cannot be expressed on the calibration report unless it's specified by the customer. Hence, you can't dictate that you're going to have this calibration artifact has a calibration due date of 6 months. So that has to be specified by the customer. Does not even need to be on the report, but if it is on the report, it needs to be specified by the customer. Excuse me, customer. Opinions and interpretations. This is a line item 510.5. When opinions and interpretations are included, the laboratory shall document the basis which the opinions and interpretations have been made. Opinions and interpretations shall clearly marked as such in a test report. This is specified for test reports. You just can't state an opinion without documenting the basis on what it was made from. Note within 510.2, opinions and interpretations included in a test report may comprise, but limited to the following: an opinion on the statement of compliance, non-compliance of the results with the requirements, fulfillment of a contractual requirements, recommendations on how to use the results, and guidance to be used for improvements. Okay, the 510.6, this is in regards to subcontractors. So this is if you're subcontracting your calibration or testing reports and you're incorporating that into the reports that you provide your clients. So when the test reports contains results performed by subcontractors, these results shall be clearly identified. The subcontractor shall report the result in writing or electronically. When a calibration has been subcontracted, the laboratory performing the work shall issue the calibration certificate to the contracting laboratory. So you're the contracting laboratory. You're submitting it to the subcontractor. The report is issued to you as a contracting laboratory. The subcontractor does not need to be identified in the report. This is the report that you're issuing to your customer. However, the laboratory must be able to identify which of their subcontractors produced the results. The laboratory must keep a copy of the subcontractor's report as part of the job records. Reference section 4.5, which is actual requirements for subcontracting, which 4.5.2 specifies the laboratory shall advise the customer of the arrangements in writing when appropriate and gain an approval of the customer, preferably in writing. So that is stating earlier in the standard, prior to subcontracting any reports, customer needs to be notified. Where appropriate, the approval needs to be granted. Again, if you're providing the reports, the results shall be clearly identified. So if your reports contain the results of subcontractors, those results needs to be specified within the calibration reports that you're issuing to your customers. All right, 510.7, electronic transmission of results. Again, we're getting into areas that are both common to calibration and testing. In the case of transmissions of test or calibration results by telephone, telex, facsimile, or other electronic or electromagnetic means, the requirements of this international standard shall be met. So what does that mean? Two concerns that come to mind would be that the client may be able to edit the report, and also customer confidentiality may be breached with the internet and the use of email. So bear in mind 17025 is 2005. Maybe you know that we're looking for a revised, updated 17025 next year. This is even more prevalent today than it was in 2005. An example of how to overcome this would be to use an Adobe PDF format and then allow a password to prevent changing or editing the document. An additional customer password would then be used to open the document. So with doing this, we just don't want to breach any issues with customer confidentiality and the integrity of the tester calibrations that are being reported. We don't want the end user to be able to edit those. Okay, 510A is pretty straightforward. This is the format of reports and certificates. The format shall be designated to accomplish each type of test or calibration carried out and to minimize the possibility of misunderstanding or misuse. A couple notes there. Attention should be given to the layout of the test report or calibration certificate, especially with regard to the presentation of the test or calibration data and ease of assimilation by the reader. And the headings should be as standardized as far as possible. 510, we're going to talk about amendments to calibration reports. This is, you've issued a report, maybe you need to add to it after it was released. Some material amendments to a test report or calibration certificate after issue shall only shall be made only in the form of further documentation or data transfer, which includes a statement, supplement to test or calibration certificate, serial number, or what other means you have in place as the unique identifier, or an equivalent form of wording. Hence, if you issue a report, you need to add to the report, need to relay some further information regarding the test or calibration report. You're not going to issue a whole new report. You're going to issue a supplement. So it needs to be specified as a supplement. It needs to contain that unique identifier that the initial report has. We're going to get into when you need to issue a whole new report. Let's say your customer got the report. It could be something as simple as, say, a serial number was wrong. But if you decide you're going to issue a whole new report instead of a supplement, you need to, it needs to be uniquely identified. And so there's not two reports out there with the same identifier. And it needs to contain reference to the original that it replaces. So in other words, if you do a report for whatever reason, you need to reissue it. Let's say it was certificate number 1234. You have to give it a unique number. So I would say certificate number 1234-AR, amended report. That would be a unique identifier. Then you also need to reference the report that it replaces. So somewhere on there, you need to specify that this report replaces certificate or test number 1234. Okay, that was quite a bit of ground we covered there. 510. Like I said, this last in the standard. However, this is the final product that you're providing your customers. This time here, as I specified in the beginning, I have folks at our office in Troy, Michigan, helping me out. They're going to field some questions and forward them to me. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. And what I like to do here, you should have a place on your screen for submitting questions. Going to take a break for 5 minutes. Those questions will be relayed to me. I will sign back on in a little bit. I would say about 5 minutes, and I will attempt to answer as many as I can. If a question is unanswered, or even if you think of something later on that that was not did not come to mind today, you can submit those questions directly to webinar at pjlabs.com. So right now I'm showing it's very close to 2 o'clock. I'm going to give it about 5 minutes. We're running a little bit over here. And I will come back with the questions that been sent to me and attempt to answer as many as I can. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Just got a couple questions here before I go into to those. Have a save the date here. We of course we do these webinars. We also do live training, and we actually have scheduled in November a couple public workshops. First one is a 2-day internal auditor and a 1-day measurement uncertainty workshop. I'm sorry. First 2 days would be internal auditors, which is a big overview of 17025. It also goes over auditing techniques, goes over the requirements of 17025 and interprets those. They will be on, you can see these are actually going to be presented at our Troy, Michigan headquarters. And information is available about those on our website. Day 3 is specific to measurement uncertainty. Basically, especially if you're a calibration lab and you have to report uncertainties on your report, you have to be able to identify, quantify, combine uncertainties. It's a very good overview. With these, both these courses offer case studies, a lot of hands-on activities. So again, information is available on our website if you're interested. Visit that or call our office directly. Bear with me, I'm on my phone here looking at my questions, and I only have oh, I know we went over. We may have lost some people along the way here. Is the PowerPoint available for the attendee? Actually, this presentation is available to anybody. Again, go to our website, and if you go to the resource training tab, under webinars, we have past webinars, and this one hopefully will be up there in the near future, along with all the other ones we've done in the past. So again, if you may see something that we've done there in the past that you may want to go back and look at, they're all available. So feel free to visit our website, and like I said, this one will be available as well. As far as the next webinar, right now we do not have one scheduled. We're going to have another one before the end of the year. And hopefully if you're on our mailing list, you should be alerted to that. And also that on our website, and then also if you're on our mailing list, you should be sent a notification of that. Okay, so the only other question I have is please provide an example or two of what an opinion might look like on a certificate when it might be relevant. Again, I'm assuming this is testing, because opinions are related to testing, and it should be provided within the manner of that it was as it was based on. So one thing that comes to mind, and I'm thinking of my testing experience with moisture testing, perhaps we specify that you have to, when something comes into the lab, you have to have it tested within a set period of time where the shelf life might be affected. Let's say, for example, a sample was collected on a day, however, it was not shipped to the lab for several days later. That might actually affect the validity of the testing results. So something like that comes to mind that could be specified on there based on the date that the sample was collected, and because of actually what you were testing it for may actually had an adverse impact on the testing results. Something that may come to mind is it's more related to calibration. If let's say if you were looking testing a balance and there was a fan blowing on it and it was typically there and it was affecting the operation of the balance, perhaps opinion would be, hey, this should be moved because this may have an adverse effect on the testing that is being done with this particular balance. I don't run into it a whole lot. There are two that comes to mind. So anything that, let me just read the question again. So I think in both cases that is relevant. You need to, based on what your opinion is based on. I hope that sounds okay. So in the one with moisture content, based on the fact that it should be tested within, say, 24 hours after collection, and in the case where there was a delay in shipping or getting it to the lab, that may be the basis for the opinion. Again, they are the only two questions that I have. So we've gone over. Again, if anything comes to mind, you can submit the questions there still to webinar@pjlabs.com. Again, a reminder about our upcoming workshop. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully you found this information informative and beneficial to you in your laboratory operation and compliance with 17025. So again, be on the lookout for our next webinar. Until then, wish everybody a good afternoon, and we will be talking again later. Thank you.